welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo. Let's talk about foundations. I already talked about the commanders from this set, or sets, I guess. It's, sort of a bunch of things combined, which really doesn't matter. It's all legal in the commander format. That's all we really care about, us commander players, right? So I'll be talking about the 99 cards in this video. And, a little bit of overview of how I feel about this set. Ultimately, I would say I like it. It is probably my favorite set this year because, man, I have not been a big fan of most of the stuff that came out this year. As far as the aesthetic goes, it's like the only set this year that had an aesthetic that I didn't really dislike. I didn't like much of the other ones. This one, because it's a core set, of course, it doesn't really have an aesthetic, which is a good thing. I like that. So, I don't know. Maybe that's just me, boring old man, right? The reprints I will briefly touch on. We got some good ones, but as I say all the time, whenever you're coming out with core sets or whatever, some commander set where you're reprinting a lot of staples and stuff like that, what I really like to see is new art. I love seeing new art on old staples. This Sangromancer, for example, love the art on this card. I mean, again, it's all subjective, obviously. For me, I think this looks really cool. I mean, the first one wasn't bad, but this one looks really cool. It's a commander staple. I don't see it much anymore, but I love seeing new art on old staples. Sad Robot, Solemn Simulacrum, one of my favorite creatures of all time. I have it in a few decks for sure, and I ran out and bought the Fallout one simply because, hey, it's a new Sad Robot with a new art, and I like having alternate arts on cards I use all the time. This one looks pretty sweet as well. Probably will grab a copy of this just so I have a new Sad Robot art. Why not? Few things I don't love from this set. Again, getting to the whole art thing. A lot of people have knocked the anime art from this set. I'm not the biggest fan of it either. I don't know if it suits Magic necessarily. Again, it's all subjective, but that would be the one thing aesthetically that I don't love from this set. I really don't love the anime art myself. I also don't love that they are calling it this creature on cards now. So for example, Helpful Hunter, which came out in this set, 1 on a white cat, 1/1. When this creature enters, draw a card. I don't know. I just don't love that. I also don't love the enters. Obviously, they did that a couple of sets ago. I like enters the battlefield. I don't know. It just sounds more Magic to me. When this creature enters, draw a card. I mean, that's just so boring, isn't it? I know. There's something about that just really rubs me the wrong way. I don't love it. But, again, it's a tiny little gripe, I suppose. We got vanilla creatures back, though, and I don't know. I had heard somewhere that they stopped printing vanilla creatures. There was like a lot of sets in a row, in fact, where we didn't really get any vanilla creatures, and they pretty much, I don't know, maybe they were talking about retiring them. Again, whenever Wizards of the Coast says we're going to do something or not do something, I'm like, yeah, sure, we'll see. In a couple of months, they'll just change it back, right? So we didn't get vanilla creatures for a long time anyway, and we definitely got some in this set, but again, I have kind of a gripe here. So let's talk about Quake Strider Ceratops, 3 green, dinosaur. So you can go on all those dinosaur decks. It's a vanilla creature, but it's a 12/8. And man, they're just really all over the place with power toughness now. Again, that's another thing that for me, obviously it's a power creep thing, but this is just getting ridiculous, isn't it? A 6 mana 12/8? That's insane. Like, there's no standard anymore. The standard for creatures, even vanilla creatures, again, a grizzly bears, a 2 mana 2/2, that was the standard. The standard was a creature's mana value should be equal to its power. And if it was better than that, then it should have a horrible downside. Or Isamaru was, okay, it's a 1 mana 2/2, but it's legendary, so you can't just put a whole bunch into play. That's the downside. The downside was it was a legendary creature. Then they just started doing whatever, and now we're to the point where not only do these creatures not have downsides, we're now getting a 12 power creature for 6 mana. This is double the standard, or at least what the standard used to be. We are now, instead of getting a 6/6 creature for 6 mana, which is what for most of Magic's history you would get, now we're getting a 12/8. And I realize it doesn't have trample, but it's still a super scary creature. Even in a commander game, guys, this is a creature you have to block. You have to block this guy. If you don't chump block this guy, you're taking 12 to the face. And 6 mana is not hard to get out. I guarantee you, this might not look like much, but you guys throw this in your decks, and I guess people probably would throw this in some of their dinosaur tribal decks. I think it would definitely be worth it. Throw this in a deck, any green stompy deck, whatever. And yeah, people will go, oh, okay, vanilla creature, no big deal, right? But on turn like 5 or 4 even, when you slap this down in your mono green deck, your opponents have to come up with an answer to this, or they're going to be taking 12 to the face. Even in a commander game, that is significant. Another thing that I think we got to slow down on here, heir apparent. So first of all, let's slow down on the pun cards. Man, they're just going bananas with the pun cards lately, right? The real meme cards. Heir apparent. 1 and a white rabbit noble 2/2. When this creature enters, create a number of 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens equal to the number of other creatures you control named heir apparent. And of course, a deck can have any number of cards named heir apparent. They're doing this too much. They came out with one already this year, in fact, in the Assassin's Creed set. And maybe because it was in the Assassin's Creed set and that set didn't sell great or whatever, maybe they wanted another one. We already have one in each color. So I was like, okay, we're done. That's it. We got one of each color. That's it. We don't need to do this anymore. So now we got another one in mono white. And I just really hope they slow down on this. I had some patrons on the Discord saying that they do this because it sells packs more because, of course, the person that wants to build this deck, this is a common, right? It's already telling me this is a $2 common. It might actually end up being more than that, right? When you have a common in a set that has, you can have any number in your deck, well, that means a commander player, I mean, I guess if you want to do it in another format as well, but for sure a commander player, they're going to need like 30 of them for their deck. So of course, you're just going to go cracking packs like crazy because it's going to increase the chances that you get your heir apparent. It is a common after all, right? So of course you're going to get some. Some people have alluded to the fact that it's just a gimmick to help sell packs. I just don't love, again, this is a rule breaking thing, right? A deck can have any number of, and I'm fine with that, but let's slow down on it. Let's not do this too much. Let's not make it a thing that's not special anymore, right? The other thing I don't want to really go down the road of, and it worries me a little, I'll just say, worries me a little, Leyline Axe. And you could probably tell from the name what we're doing here. 4 mana artifact equipment. If this card is in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield. That's right. We now have a artifact and an equipment, a turn 0 play essentially, right? You're beginning the game with this on the battlefield. Equip creature gets +1/+1 and has double strike and trample. That's no joke either. And equip 3. So this is actually a really good equipment. And how much is this going to be an auto include for people, right? It's an equipment that you can just begin it on the battlefield, right? Any commander that you can get out really, really quickly. You know, it'd be great to have a axe sitting on the battlefield before your commander even comes out. The part that I don't really love, though, is, are we going to start doing this now? Are we going to start doing artifacts that are ley lines that begin on the bat? Again, we're going again. I don't mind this so much, but we're going against how the game of Magic is played. Putting any number of cards in your deck goes against the fundamental way that Magic is played, and beginning with cards on the battlefield before the game starts is also, you know, and I don't mind it a little bit. But let's not go too far. Let's not just start making artifacts that, you know, you're going to start games and guys are going to have 2-3 things on the battlefield before the game even starts. Maybe they'll start doing this with creatures as well. I hope they don't. That's all I'm saying. Warning here, I hope they don't start going down this road more. All right, getting to the cards that people are for sure going to be playing here. So Rite of the Dragon Caller, 4 red enchantment. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token flying. Wow. So obviously that goes in all those Is It Spellslinger decks, or I guess any Spellslinger deck that has red. You know, the Grixis ones, maybe the mono red ones. This is definitely going to go in an absolute ton of decks. Maybe in the Dragon tribal decks, maybe. You know, I think if I was, you know, I'm one of those guys playing a mono red Dragon tribal deck. There are a few of those. I might find room for this. You're just going to have instants of sorceries in your deck that you're going to be casting anyway, right? Why not get a 5/5 dragon as a little bit of a payoff for that? So I think it might be worth it. Certainly it's going to see a ton of play in the format. It's a fantastic payoff for an instant and sorcery deck. I mean, obviously, right? Another fantastic payoff for those instant and sorcery decks. And again, I had a couple patrons talking on the Discord about how, do we really need more payoffs for the Spellslinger decks, man? They got so much. Talk about an archetype that doesn't need any more help. The instant and sorcery archetype does not need any more help, but they keep getting it. So Archmage of Ruins, 3 blue, giant wizard, 3/6. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, We do have a few effects like that already, but then on top of that, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. So you're getting the cost reduction and you're getting the card draw. So this is even more of an auto include in the Spellslinger decks than is the Dragon guy. This is going in all of them, right? This is going in every single blue deck, whether it be Izzet or Mono Blue or whatever, that is in the Spellslinger theme, without a doubt. All right, let's talk about maybe a little more interesting of a card. I think Perforating Artist, 1 black and a red devil, 3/2 with Death Touch, has the raid ability at the beginning of your end step. If you attack this turn, each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent of their choice or discards a card. And a lot of people will say, okay, that's not great because your opponent gets the choice. Yeah, but this just sits on the battlefield. And if you're attacking already, and this guy's got Death Touch, so any opponent who doesn't have creatures they want to lose, it's very easy to just attack with this guy. But any deck where you're just attacking on the regular, this is just going to force your opponents to lose 3 life every turn. Or possibly sack a permanent or discard a card. Those are all good. Yeah, they get the choice, but they're all good choices for you. And this is just free value. All you have to do is attack, and this happens on the end step. Pretty great card, I think. Really great card, and a card that is definitely going to go in a lot of decks, I think. Spinner of Souls, 2 and a green. Spider Spirit, 4/3. So I guess the Spider Tribal decks is definitely going to want this guy, but pretty much any heavy creature theme in green, I think, is going to want this guy. So it's got reach, of course. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may reveal cards from top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library and hand them order. This guy is just such fantastic value, right? Great, essentially board wipe protection. And of course, it's not actually protecting you against the board wipe. What it's doing is someone wipes your board, and for every non-token creature you control, not including this guy, obviously, I get to refill my hand. If I lose 3 non-token creatures to that board wipe, for each of those, I will reveal cards from the top of my library until I reveal a creature card and put it into my hand. So on my turn now, I can untap and just refill the board again. This is just fantastic value in any creature-heavy theme. I mean, it gets better in certain themes, but you can just put this in any creature-heavy deck in green, and it's going to give you lots of great value. All right, Dreadwing Scavenger, 1 blue and a black Nightmare Bird, 2/2 with flying. When this creature enters or attacks, draw a card and then discard a card. Has the Threshold ability. This creature gets +1/+1 and has Death Touch as long as there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard. So obviously, kind of hearkening back to Baleful Strix a little bit. Very similar. Baleful Strix, of course, is, I don't know, probably one of the best creatures of all time, in my opinion. If we go across all formats here, this guy is going to cost 1 more. It's going to draw you a card, but then you also have to discard. However, the discard can be an upside in a lot of decks. Doesn't have Death Touch right away, but it will get there. Every time you attack, you get to loot. I just love looting in the Commander format. I'm becoming more and more of a fan of it because just get rid of that thing you don't want, right? Land flooded. Throw that land away and get something a little more usable. Having a creature that likely won't be blocked, that you can just get in for damage every turn with and loot with, seems pretty good. I think this will go in a few decks. Here's a really interesting creature. I love creatures like this. Abyssal Harvester, 1 black Demon Warlock, 3/2. Tap, exile target creature card from a graveyard that was put there this turn. So anyone's graveyard can be your opponent's, right? Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a nightmare in addition to its other types. Then exile all other nightmare tokens you control. So this is going to be like Fairy Artisans, I guess, where you only get 1, right? You can have 1 at a time, essentially. Obviously, you can get into some shenanigans with this if you had a conspiracy in play. That's where the shenanigans can get into because, of course, with conspiracy, it shuts off creature types. So you can name anything other than nightmare, whatever you're already using, right? If you have conspiracy in a deck already and you're naming knights or elves or whatever, you could throw Abyssal Harvester in there because all your creatures, other creature types, will be shut off, right? Those nightmare tokens that you are creating are going to be knights instead or elves instead. So when you use this ability, you'll make a token of something, then exile all nightmare tokens you control. Okay, well, you don't control any, so you just get to keep everything. So that's a neat little sort of scenario you can get into. I don't know if I'd build a whole deck around it. Just on its own, though, it's a really neat creature. Just sits there and, kill your opponent's creature, and then you get a token copy of it by tapping this guy. It is also kind of graveyard hate as well. It is also doing the leaves the graveyard thing. If you have a Tormod deck, probably seems like a great fit there as well, because it's getting you those triggers. Just a really neat card that could probably go in a few decks. I really like creatures like this. Raise the Past is a card that I'm definitely going to be putting in at least 2 of my decks. So 2 white sorcery. Return all creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That definitely fits in those decks where it fits, right? Obviously, if you're doing that sort of a theme, I have a couple of decks that are doing that. Return to the Ranks is this a power creep version of Return to the Ranks? Yeah, maybe not. Definitely, if you're playing that card and I'm playing that card in 2 decks, Raise the Past is doing a very similar thing, so certainly is going to see play in the format without a doubt. Preposterous Proportions is definitely a card, I imagine, that is getting some buzz. So 5 green sorcery. Creatures you control get +10/+10 and gain vigilance until end of turn. So again, just like sort of the power toughness thing, the overrun type of effects. Also, it's just like, let's just throw some ridiculous number on there. What does it matter? It costs 7 mana, right? I will say, I actually am not sure about this because it's not giving trample, right? Overrun effects usually give trample. This is giving vigilance, which is good. Obviously, if it gave trample instead of vigilance, it would be insane and everybody would be playing it. It would be maybe better than a Craterhoof, I think, probably. I think likely this would be better than Craterhoof if it gave trample. But the fact that it doesn't give trample is very significant and obviously makes it a lot worse. How good is it? I don't know. It's definitely good. I mean, giving all your creatures +10/+10, if you're in a go-wise strategy, that's amazing. The vigilance is nice. It's not useless. It's not as good as trample, but it is nice to be able to swing all out. And then if your opponent plays like a fog effect, put more fog effects in your deck, folks. Now it's not a blowout for you, right? It normally would be. If I turn all my creatures sideways and try to get in for lethal and someone just fogs me, now I'm open to get crushed, right? Here, you got vigilance, so that is something, for sure. It is a lot easier to go all in with your creatures when they do have vigilance. However, obviously trample would be way better in this situation. It's still pretty good. Definitely going to see play. High Society Hunter, 3 black vampire noble 5/3 with flying. Whenever this creature attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. That's already not bad. Whenever another non-token creature dies, draw a card. Okay, well, that's obviously going in a ton of decks. And Harvester of Souls has been a commander staple since forever and has the exact same wording. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you draw a card. Obviously, it's anyone's non-token creatures, not just yours. So you're going to get a trigger when you sack a creature to your High Society Hunter, but whenever anyone else's non-token creatures dies, you also get a card draw. So I think this is, again, we're in the power creep situation where this seems like a strict upgrade to Harvester of Souls to me. I mean, it's kind of a sack outlet for you. It also gets bigger. It also has flying. I think this is just a better version. Curator of Destinies. Again, getting into the power creep situation. So 4 blue, Sphinx 5/5. This spell can't be countered. That's always good. And has flying. When this creature enters, look at the top 5 cards of your library and separate them into a face down pile and a face up pile. An opponent chooses one of those piles. Put that pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So, of course, this is doing the fact or fiction thing. And again, is a essentially power crept version of another old commander staple. Sphinx of Uthun, which I don't know if anyone plays anymore. I definitely haven't seen that card in a long time. People used to play it all the time. It is essentially fact or fiction on a creature. It's a 5/6, and this guy is a 5/5, but I don't think anyone really cares about that. This one can't be countered, which is probably way better than having a 1 bigger toughness. This is doing the face down, face up pile thing, which I think is maybe better. Again, you could argue whether, doing it up or down or whatever is better or not, but definitely, I think this is just a power creep version of Sphinx of Uthun, and I think probably will replace it in a lot of decks. Banner of Kinship, again, I think we're in the power creep of an old commander staple situation here. 5 mana artifact. As this artifact enters, choose a creature type. This artifact enters with a fellowship counter on it for each creature you control of the chosen type. Creatures you control the chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter on this artifact. In fact, this is probably a power creep version of a couple of different artifacts that have been commander staples for a long time. Door of Destinies is a card doing something very similar. I think this is probably better because that is you're going to choose a creature type, and when you cast a spell of the chosen type, you're going to put charge counters on it. That one kind of sits there and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's also just sitting there being a target. Whereas with Banner of Kinship, you can come down immediately and you immediately get a huge impact. Again, it almost becomes that overrun Craterhoof Behemoth effect where immediately, assuming you have like 7 creatures in play, your entire team gets +7/+7 like right now, and you can use it immediately. Again, similar to that overrun or Craterhoof Behemoth effect. It is also very similar to a Coat of Arms, I think. And of course, Coat of Arms is a commander staple that's been played a long, long time in tribal themes. It's a dangerous one, though, because each creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares at least one creature type with it. This includes your opponents. So if your opponent's playing a tribal deck, they're going to love seeing you play a Coat of Arms. It just can incidentally, like a creature type like human or something, you'll just have like an Archaeomancer in play, and all of a sudden it'll be like a 7/8 or something like that. It'll just be this giant scary creature. Coat of Arms is a really dangerous card. I think Banner of Kinship is a less dangerous card because, of course, it's one-sided. You don't have to worry about your opponents taking advantage of it. I know people will say, okay, well, I need lots of creatures in play before I play this or it's not very good. That's fine. Same as with Coat of Arms, right? With Coat of Arms, you're not going to play it unless you already have a lot of creatures in play because, again, your opponents are probably going to take more advantage of it than you are. So that's a card that nobody ever plays unless you're playing it incorrectly. You're not going to actually throw it on the table until you already have like 8 or 10 creatures of that type in play. The same is true for Banner of Kinship. I think it's a strict upgrade to a Coat of Arms. I think it's probably a strict upgrade to a Door of Destinies as well. It's certainly going to see a ton of play in the format. Sylvan Scavenging, nothing flashy about this card, just sort of a good stuff card, I think, but it is going to see a lot of play. 1 green enchantment at the beginning of your end step. Choose one, put a +1 counter on target creature you control, or create a 3/3 green raccoon creature token if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So it's just going to sit there. I love enchantments like this, especially ones that are end step triggers that you can get it right away. So it's just going to sit there every turn, giving you value, putting counters on your creatures, or cranking out raccoons. By the way, a 3/3 raccoon? Ooh, this guy could beat the crap out of a grizzly bears if he wanted to. That's a big-ass raccoon. I will also point out, if you hadn't noticed, another change here, and I have heard going forward, this is how enchantments are always going to look. What was it, Theros, where they originally did that? The sparkly border that they're now, I think, always going to be doing on enchantments. That's what I heard. So another change from this set. Moving along, Sire of 7 Deaths. Definitely a card that I'm sure people are getting excited over. A 7-mana Eldrazi 7/7. First strike, vigilance, menace, trample, reach, lifelink, and ward pay 7 life. That is a whole lot of keyword abilities. And of course, we're doing the 7 thing. It's kind of like Octavia, but with 7s. So it's a 7/7 for 7 with 7 abilities that also has ward pay 7 life. It's a really good creature. That's it. It's just a really good creature that obviously if you're playing an Eldrazi deck, everyone's going to just slam it in there. I guess if you were playing, where other than that would it specifically go? The Acroma that is looking for keywords, any deck that is looking for keyword abilities on creatures, you want, creatures you control have these abilities, or creature cards in your graveyard have these abilities, that's going to be a great one. This is going to be a really great card for those decks as well. So for that reason, it's going to go in a bunch of decks. High Fae Trickster is one that I'm really curious how much play this is going to see. So 3 and a blue, fairy wizard, 4/2 with flash. So it's a fairy and a wizard, so very easy to slot into a fairy tribal and a wizard tribal deck for sure. Also has flash, so that makes it so, a lot of the fairy decks are very control-y, have a lot of flash creatures already. Same with wizard decks. So that can be very helpful there as well. Of course, it has flying, and you may cast spells as though they had flash. So this is just another Leyline of Anticipation effect. Is it better? Again, it's debatable. It's just another one of those effects. Obviously, Leyline of Anticipation can be free. This, you're going to have to flash it in. This is also on a creature, so it's more likely to die than is a Leyline of Anticipation. Which is better? I don't know, but this is just another effect that does that. Exemplar of Light, 2 white angel, 3/3 flying. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So we know what theme this is going in, and there's, of course, a ton of white life gain decks out there. Also, though, whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on this creature, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Oh boy, just piling on the abilities onto this guy. So, of course, what this essentially means is, this means a couple of things. First of all, in your life gain deck, you got a Soul Warden in play. This essentially becomes draw a card every turn on everyone's turn. It only triggers once, but on everyone's turn, they're likely going to have a creature enter the battlefield. You're going to get your trigger off of this, put a counter on it, and when it gets a counter on it, you're going to draw a card. So this just becomes draw a card on everyone's turn, essentially. If you have an effect like that in play, it's a slam dunk in a life gain deck. I don't like the it's a slam dunk effects to shoehorn into my life gain decks because, of course, I have a life gain deck. However, as it happens, and this is where the other place you can play this, I recently just transformed my Patron the Kitsune deck into more of a +1/+1 counter theme. I thought it was, rather than just making a generic mono white life gain deck, it was a little on the boring side. I thought I'll do a little bit of a fringe theme there and do the +1/+1 counter theme because there is actually quite a bit of crossover between +1/+1 and life gain. There's actually quite a few cards that do that. So obviously, I gotta put this in there because it's literally doing those two things. And also, you can do this just in a +1/+1 counter theme. It is, I think, worth it. Even if you don't have any life gain triggers at all, just whenever you put one or more +1/+1 counters on this creature, you get the draw card, right? So if you're doing a Selesnya +1/+1 counter theme, now I can just put counters on this guy and, right? Again, Rocco seems like a great commander for this card, funny enough, because I can just use my Rocco trigger to put a counter on this guy, draw a card. I'm also making food, and food gains life. So that does work there. So there's a commander that you might not think to throw this guy in where it actually probably would work. Scrawling Crawler is definitely a card that's going to see some play. So 3 mana, artifact creature, Phyrexian Construct, 3/2. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. So this is at the beginning of your upkeep. That is important to note. This is like a Howling Mine effect, but Howling Mine is on everyone's turn, where this is on your turn. That is a very important distinction. So depending on where you want to play this, it could make a difference. However, why this is going to see probably a lot of play is whenever an opponent draws a card, that player loses 1 life. So this is a card you could put in any deck, right? Just like an Underworld Dreams you could put in any deck. Now, Underworld Dreams isn't drawing your opponents an extra card, but, having that on a card makes it less likely that your opponents are going to get rid of it, right? That the Huggy effect there makes it so that your opponents are like, okay, the Scrawling Crawler is dealing me damage, or I guess losing life whenever I draw cards, but it's also drawing me an extra card every turn, so I don't really want to kill it. It actually can be an upside. Just this card on its own is a really easy slot into a lot of decks, I would say. You could put this in any deck where you just have trouble closing out games, and just let my opponents kill themselves, right? They draw more cards and they'll just lose more life. It's obviously also going to be a slam dunk when any deck where you want your opponents to be drawing cards. Zerzoth would be one where it's going to be a slam dunk. Obviously, the Nekusar decks, it's going to be a slam dunk. I mean, how many commanders do we have like that now? Any wheel commander is probably going to love this because you're just incidentally going to be having your opponents draw a bunch of cards. My patron has a Mrs. Bumbleflower deck where you're having your opponents draw cards. So if you have a deck like that, any sneaky hug deck, what I call a sneaky hug deck is a deck where it's like, hey, everybody gets to draw cards, but really I'm going to use it to kill you with. This is a great card for that. This is going to go in a bunch of decks for sure. I'm really curious how many decks this is going to go in. Lunar Insight, 2 and a blue, sorcery. Draw a card for each different mana value among non-land permanents you control. And this is one that, you got to think about it. And maybe you got to try it out. Maybe you guys should run out and throw this card in a few decks to see how good it works for you. I might as well. Funny enough, I just talked about Golden Ratio in my Strixhaven video, a few weeks back. A 3-mana card that is reliant on the stuff you have in play. Very similar, funny enough, card that is probably going to, in the right scenario, draw you a significant amount of cards. This one, same thing where, okay, this actually could draw you 0 cards, but of course I'm not going to cast it where I'm drawing 0 cards. I'm going to cast it where I want to draw a bunch. If I have no non-land permanents in play, then I'm obviously not going to cast it. Just like with the Golden Ratio, you wouldn't cast it right after someone board wiped. You'd wait till the right moment to do it. And, some people like those, some people don't. I like them. I like the card draw spells that, yeah, maybe sometimes they're not going to be great, but other times they're going to be fantastic. I think it's very easy to get 3 off of this, and a 3-mana draw 3 is great. And then getting 4 off of this, getting 5 off of this is very doable. I think this is a pretty decent card draw spell. I'm curious to see what other people think of it, though. All right, getting to the real bangers that are going to go in a ton of decks for sure. Valkyrie's Call, 3 white enchantment. Whenever a non-token, non-angel creature you control dies, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. It has flying and it is an angel in addition to its other types. Jeez, hey, how many decks does this go in? This is just a better Luminous Broodmoth, I think. Obviously, Luminous Broodmoth has the stipulation of flying, so you're just not going to put that in a deck where you got lots of flying going on. Here, you're not going to put this in your angel deck, obviously, because it's not going to do a whole lot. You could play it in just about anything else, though, right? Because a non-token, non-angel creature you control dies, you return it to the battlefield. That's already good. And you're also going to pull a +1/+1 counter on it, and it also has flying. Like, wow, right? I mean, funny enough, you could put this in like a dragon tribal deck, right? Like, you could put this in almost any deck other than angel tribal. Just a powerhouse. Speaking of powerhouses, Quilled Great Worm is going to be a powerhouse and is going to be played in a lot of decks. 4 green, worm 7/7 with trample. Again, we're already getting a 6 mana 7/7 with trample, which is pretty good, but we got a whole bunch of phenomenal abilities here as well. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. And they have the reminder text here because this is kind of a starter set for newer players, I guess. It must survive to get the counters. That's right. If your creature takes damage, it's going to die before it gets counters on it, so it won't survive. But man, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, so of course, it can't be blocking, essentially, right? It has to be attacking. You put that many +1/+1 counters on it. This is very similar to Necropolis Regent. It's kind of like the mono green Necropolis Regent, right? This one says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So you actually have to get in for damage there with that one. With this one, you don't even have to do damage to a player. You just deal combat damage. So you can be dealing combat damage to your opponent's blocking creatures, right? If they want to chump with all their 1/1s, you're going to put that many +1/+1 counters on it. But on top of that, you may cast this card from your graveyard by removing 6 counters from among creatures you control in addition to paying its other costs. So you can cast this guy from your graveyard if your opponents happen to get it off the battlefield. I guess maybe it's better in a deck where you're doing a counter theme, but you're putting tons of counters on your creatures already with this guy. So his first ability plays into his next ability. So you don't really need to put this in a deck where you're doing that. You just put this in any deck where you're attacking with your creatures a lot, and you're just going to pile counters on your creatures. And if someone kills your Quilled Great Worm, you can remove the counters that you put on them to get this guy back to the graveyard. It's not as good of a game ender as a Craterhoof Behemoth, I don't think, but it is certainly a card that your opponents are just going to have to get it off the battlefield real quick, or else things are going to get completely out of hand. All right, Blasphemous Edict. This is probably, I would say, the card that's getting the most buzz from this set for obvious reasons. It is a black Blasphemous Act, essentially. So 3 black sorcery. You may pay a black rather than pay this spell's mana cost if there are 13 or more creatures on the battlefield. Each player sacrifices 13 creatures of their choice. So, of course, the comparisons are going to be to Blasphemous Act, and it's funny because I literally just made a video talking about how I took Blasphemous Act out of a deck, and no, I was not trying to be clickbaity, guys. I actually took Blasphemous Act out of one of my decks because I found a better board wipe, right? Blasphemous Act, I just actually think is getting less good, mostly because there's a whole lot of stuff out there for protecting your team, and protecting your team against 13 damage is not that difficult. Protecting your team against sacrificing 13 creatures is way more difficult, right? Flawless Maneuver being a perfect example. There's a card that, man, I actually don't have that in any decks, and I think I probably will never play it again because great against the Blasphemous Act, but so bad against so many other board wipes, this one included, right? Anything that exiles, anything that forces you to sacrifice. If you have one of those protection effects that just makes your team indestructible, it certainly is not as good as it used to be because of a card like this and a lot of others as well. So you might want to start rethinking cards like that. Let's evaluate this card, okay? So obviously, as you could probably tell, I already like this card better than Blasphemous Act. Of course, it's black. We already have lots of great black board wipes. So we do have to compare this to other black board wipes. Comparing this to Blasphemous Act is, okay, I guess if you have a Rakdos deck, I would put this in over Blasphemous Act. Absolutely, I would. I would probably still play Blasphemous Act if I had a Rakdos deck, though. Again, I took Blasphemous Act out of a Boros deck because white has all the best board wipes, but this is a card that you could replace a Blasphemous Act with, and I think likely it will do better for you in most situations. Now, a lot of people will say it's less likely that you will playing 1 black mana for this. Fine. That's okay. I can pay 5 for this. I have no problem paying 5 for this. That's the thing that I think makes this better. Paying 6 or 7 mana for a Blasphemous Act doesn't seem great. Paying 5 mana to have all my opponents sacrifice their whole team, that's great. No problem. I don't have to pay 1 for this. Don't get hung up on that, guys. All you have to do is look at similar effects. Barter and Blood, everybody. Who remembers that card? Used to be a card that was played in the Commander format quite a bit because, of course, Voltron strategies were a lot more common, and forcing your opponents to sacrifice creatures was a great way to get around those hexproof, shroud, indestructible commanders. But they could protect themselves by having one other creature in play to sacrifice to those edict effects. Here, though, you would get around it, and a lot of people played this card for that reason. This is a 4 mana card that only makes each player sacrifice 2 creatures, right? So already we have a way better version here. This is just 5 mana, and everyone has to essentially sack their entire board. I will point out there is the rare situation, and funny enough, this happened to me recently with another really good board wipe that I like a lot, by invitation only, which is funny enough doing a very similar thing, essentially sacrificing 13 creatures. Again, if we were to make the comparison, I would say you don't have the cost reduction on by invitation only. However, I like it in a go wide strategy because I can pick 2 or 3 and have all my opponents sacrifice all their creatures and I still keep most of mine. So that's why that's better there. Whereas here, everyone sacrifices 13. You can't manipulate it as much. Again, we could go back and forth on all day, which one's better, which one's not. Ultimately, I think this is a great board wipe, regardless of whether you get the cost reduction or not. That's the big part I want to get across here. However, you can get into the situation like I did with by invitation only just a little while ago, where your opponent has more than 13 creatures and it doesn't seem very good. I would say that's a rare situation, but it can happen. And of course, because they get to choose, they can choose their 2 or 3 best creatures and get rid of the rest. That's still not bad. It's still good. And obviously, if you're in a theme where you want your opponents to be sacrificing stuff, or you want to be sacrificing stuff, of course, there's lots of decks doing that. It's extra good. I think this is a fantastic board wipe for sure. Where does it fall into mono black board wipes? I would say Toxic Deluge is still better. I would say it's the best. I would definitely play this over Damnation because I don't really think Damnation is that good. I think that's a really overrated black board wipe. This is probably number 2 for me now with black board wipes. Even if you don't get the cost reduction, 5 mana to have basically every single creature on board sacrificed, pretty good. I don't know if it'll be the most popular card in Commander from this set, though. It might be Soulstone Sanctuary. I don't know if this is a little bit of a sleeper. Maybe, maybe not. But for me, the cards that are colorless lands are always the cards that are the easiest to shoehorn into decks, right? That also plays a part with how popular a card will be. This is a colorless land, so for that reason, obviously because it's colorless, it can go in any deck, but also because it's a land, it's so easy to shoehorn into any deck, right? All I have to do is take out a basic land or any other utility land that, maybe I put it in my deck a few months ago and it's not working out like I had hoped. I'll take it out and replace it with Soulstone Sanctuary because this might be even better. And I think this is pretty good. Tap static colorless, doesn't come into play tap, not a lot of downside, great. 4 mana, this land becomes a 3/3 creature with vigilance that is all creature types. It's still a land. So this is a land that will become all creature types, and for that reason, it gets played in a ton of decks. It can, at least, doesn't have to be, but it can go in any tribal deck because this becomes whatever that tribe is you're playing. It also goes in all the changeling decks because that's literally what you're doing in the deck, right? You're having creatures with all creature types for a variety of reasons. I have a deck that does something like this that I will likely grab this card for. I will point out, and a lot of people say, Mutavault's just way better. It only costs 1 mana, and you're getting a similar effect. But this is permanent, and permanent can be a downside, but it can also be an upside, right? With Mutavault, I gotta remake it into a creature every turn. Here, I pay the 4 mana once, and it just turns into that creature and stays that way. It's still a land. You can still tap it for mana. It has a vigilance. So you can, again, if you're in that tribal theme where maybe my elves have Forest Walk, I can get in for damage with this guy and it's still untapped. So I can tap it second main phase for mana. So it's a mana dork as well. I just think this is an easy slot in to any tribal deck, any deck that is doing the changeling thing, or any deck that is doing some sort of creature type manipulation scenario, which I am doing in a deck. So that's why I'm going to grab a copy of this. I mean, for sure, there's one deck I would put this in, maybe a couple. It is also just a man land, right? Keep in mind, having a card on the battlefield that you can just turn into a land at instant speed and chump block to save my life, that's not nothing too, right? So it's just an easy slot in, right? It's maybe not the best card from the set, but because it's a colorless land that can easily slot in any deck, I think it's going to be a real popular one. There you go. Best 99 cards from the set, I think. That's essentially my review of the set as well. Like I said, of all the sets this year, this is the one, surely aesthetically, it's the one that I like the most because it just feels like a regular old Magic set. Will I buy as many cards from this as I have from other sets? I don't know. I'll probably grab a few for sure. Again, I try to stay away from the power creep cards, but if there's some really interesting, unique cards that happen to fit in my decks, I run out and grab them myself. You guys let me know in the comments below what you think are the best cards from this set, which are your favorites, and which ones you're going to go grab for your decks. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.